Hello. In this video, we're going to go through Learning Target 621A. And this is the beginning of our unit on trigonometry. And so this is about trig ratios. And so we are actually going to learn 3 ratios today. And the important thing is that all 3 of these ratios only apply to right triangles. And so you can only use right triangles for these, but these ratios are based on the fact that right triangles have very special properties. So we're going to learn 3 trig ratios, and they're probably going to sound brand new to you, but we're going to be using these a lot throughout this unit. So underneath this, I want you to divide this top section of your paper into 3 columns because we have 3 trig ratios. The first one is called sine, S-I-N-E. The second one is called cosine. And our last one is called tangent. And these all represent very special ratios that happen inside of right triangles. And in order to remember these, we actually have an acronym, kind of like PEMDAS, that will help you remember what information you need for each ratio. So this acronym is called SOHCAHTOA. S-O-H-C-A-H and T-O-A. SOHCAHTOA. And these pieces of 3 are going to tell you what information you need for each ratio. So the sine, we write this as S-I-N when we abbreviate it, but it's still pronounced sine, not sin, of an angle. And this symbol is probably new to you. It is a Greek letter called theta. And it's just a variable to represent any angle. So just like the letter X can represent a missing number, this just represents any angle. It's called theta. And so the sine of theta is equal to the triangles, or the angle's opposite side over the hypotenuse. And so the letter S gives you the sine, and the letters O and H give you opposite over hypotenuse. And so now cosine is abbreviated as C-O-S, again, still pronounced cosine, of theta is equal to the angle's adjacent side over hypotenuse. Remember, adjacent is just a fancy word to say next to. And the ca part tells us C for cosine and A and H for adjacent over hypotenuse. And our last one is abbreviated as tan, but again, still pronounced tangent, of theta is equal to the opposite side over the adjacent side. And again, TOA tells us T for tan and O and A for opposite over adjacent. So if you can remember SOHCAHTOA, you can remember all of these ratios without really having to remember the ratios themselves. So if you need to pause this to make sure you have this table written down, please do so. But then we're going to go through an example of how this is used. So in this learning target, you are finding your trig ratio. So finding the sine of a given angle, finding the cosine of a given angle. And so you're going to be given a picture of a right triangle. So let's start with our picture. And this one is triangle XYZ, and we know all the side lengths as well. And we're going to find all three trig ratios for this example. So the sine of angle Y, the cosine of angle Y, and the tangent of angle Y. So because we know we're talking about angle Y, we don't use theta anymore. Theta is for an unknown value. And so the first thing that I would recommend doing is identifying the angle you are finding, because each trig ratio is specific to that angle. So, for example, the sine of Y is not going to be the same as the sine for X. So all of these are talking about Y, so I'm going to circle my Y. That helps me identify it. Then I want to go through and label my opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse sides so I can make my life really easy when I go to use SOHCAHTOA. So I always label in this order. I always start with the hypotenuse because the hypotenuse is across from the right angle. So this is my hypotenuse. Then I do my opposite side, and I kind of like imagine, or I actually draw in an arrow all the way across from my angle to the opposite side. That's my opposite. And the only one left is the adjacent. And you can also see it's the one that's next to Y, it's touching it, but the other one that's touching it is the hypotenuse. So you kind of like ignore the hypotenuse, the other one's the adjacent. And once I have these all labeled, this becomes fairly quick to do. So I just need to remember which part of SOHCAHTOA I'm using. So for sine, I am using the SO part. And so that means I'm going to have opposite over hypotenuse. And if you label, you can see your letters really clearly. So I have O, which is 3, over H, which is 5. And if this fraction needs to be reduced, you can do that, but you do not have to. I often do not simplify, so I can see exactly where I got my numbers from. So next one is cosine. That's the ca part. So we have A over H this time. And A is 4. My H is still 5. So I have 4/5. And lastly, my tangent is my TOA part, which is opposite over adjacent, which is 3 over 4. And so for this learning target, all you're doing is you're finding these fractions identified from the picture. Those are your trig ratios. If you feel good about this, you can go on to the next thing you need to work on. If you want to see another example, I'm going to do one right now. So for the second example, let's say I have this picture. And it's asking me for the sine of A, the cosine of B, and the tangent of B. So now for this one, you notice like we switch angles, so I only do the sine of A and then I switch to B. And so in that case, start with whichever one you want and go ahead and circle that angle. So if I want to start with this first one, I'm going to circle A and label for A. So this is the hypotenuse, all the way across is my opposite, and right next to is my adjacent. And so now the sine is the SO part, so opposite over hypotenuse. which is 7 over 25. But now we need to switch angles. So now I'm not talking about angle A anymore, I'm talking about angle B. So if you have a different color, it might help to switch colors, but you can also do what I'm about to do as well. So now we're talking about angle B. So circle that one and kind of like cross out angle A. We're no longer looking at that. Now relabel your OH and A based on angle B. The hypotenuse will always stay the same because it's always across from the right angle, and that doesn't matter if we're talking about A or B. So H is the same. But now over here is my opposite, so scribble out A and put O. And right here is my adjacent. And so by scribbling them out, now I've labeled them correctly, and I'm no longer looking at angle A. And so now you can go through the cosine is the CAH part, which gives you 7 over 25. And your tangent is the OA part, which gives you 24 over 7. And so just be careful if they ask you for multiple angles within the same problem that you relabel your drawing so you can make sure you have the correct ratios at the end.